Hello and welcome back to the course Private Pilot Maneuvers. Today we'll discuss our first emergency procedure, and that is engine failure on takeoff. I'm always talking about single engine airplanes now, of course. In a twin engine aircraft, this is a completely different story, but basic training always actually happens in single engine airplanes. So this is what we're talking about right now. So an engine failure during takeoff can happen at various stages. It can happen very early in the takeoff roll, and it's normally not a big deal. Of course, you can just stop on the runway. But it can also happen right after liftoff, or maybe at 300 feet above ground. So one of the key things to master an engine failure after takeoff safely is to have a good departure briefing. So it should be actually mandatory, even if you're flying alone by yourself and you have a lot of experience, do a briefing before every flight, and if it's only to yourself, because this will drastically increase your chances of doing the right thing if you actually have an engine failure after takeoff. And this briefing should cover all the various stages of the approach, after takeoff. So it could go like this. Well, emergency briefing in case of any malfunction before rotation speed, throttle idle, apply brakes, and stop on the runway. In case of engine failure after liftoff, below 500 feet, I'll continue straight ahead, only slightly turning to avoid obstacles. In case of an engine failure above 500 feet, conditions permitting, I'll turn around for a re-landing at the airport. Now, this 500 feet was just an arbitrary value right now. Depending on the airplane you fly, this value will be different. For example, in ideal conditions on a long runway, with the airplane I normally fly, and we've tried that out, I know that in 500 feet, if everything goes well, I will be able to return to the airport. But with another airplane or with other conditions, this might not be the case. So, one very important consideration, I think, with engine failures after takeoff is that if there is any doubt as to if you can safely make it back to the airport, continue straight ahead. So in most of the cases, it's better actually to continue straight ahead, except if the terrain is really completely unlandable there. But still then, if you are below a certain altitude, you will not be able to make the turn back to the runway. So even then, it's not a good idea to turn back. The problem is that landing straight ahead gives you more time. It's normally into a headwind. You can have a bit more time to set up the approach. I mean, it's happening quickly as well, but you have a bit more time. Everything is more under control, and it's better actually to do an emergency or forced landing to a not so perfect area but under full control of the airplane than to lose control in the turn back. And this is what happens, or what can happen, because normally you take off into a headwind. Now, if you decide to turn back in the event of an engine failure, you will turn into a tailwind. And this tailwind will take you to the runway pretty fast, so everything will happen fast with a high ground speed. Furthermore, you may be tempted to fly a very tight turn with a slow speed, so there's a high chance of stalling during this turn and losing control. So you should establish an absolute minimum altitude for your aircraft with the ideal conditions where it is principally possible to turn around after an engine failure. If you look at this picture, you can see that in many cases you will not have sufficient altitude if you turn back, because it's not only a 180-degree turn you have to do. You have to turn further to actually go back over the runway and then turn another time to align yourself with the runway. So it's far more than a 180-degree turn. Always mind the wind during takeoff, so take a mental note of the wind. It's always preferable to take off into a headwind, of course, also in the case of an engine failure, if you want to turn back, because then you will be turning back, as I've said, to a tailwind, and this will increase your gliding distance, make it easier to reach the runway. Also, during your initial climb, when the engine still worked, you will have a lower ground speed and you will not be that far away from the runway when it happens. There's one theoretical aspect that you should keep in mind. Theoretically, if you would have a very, very strong headwind, let's say 20 knots, and you're turning back to try to turn back to the runway quite early, then you will turn into a strong tailwind, and this could theoretically mean that you're actually overshooting the runway when you have turned back. This should be a rare case, but just keep in mind that it's actually possible. So the reasons that are speaking for a return to the field, they are that maybe the airplane suffers less damage if you make it back to the runway, that maybe you have to fill out less paperwork than as if you have landed off airport, and maybe it might be the better option due to the terrain in front of you. But then there are a lot of reasons not to do it. First of all, you will be slow. You will be close to the ground. There's a high risk of loss of control. You will have little or no practice at all doing it. So basically doing this for the first time. A clear decision if you're high enough or not in the given conditions is difficult to make. And statistically, you are far better off to continue straight ahead. So basically what I'm saying here is only turn around if you're really sure. What helps is a good briefing, as I've said before. What also helps me sometimes, if I don't forget to do it, but I try to do it every time, is during my takeoff, I always say to myself what I would do now. So I might just say to myself, continue, so that if I have the engine failure, maybe at 200 feet above ground, I'm not tempted to return, but I continue my heading and try to land straight ahead. There have been a few studies into this phenomenon. One was performed by Rogers and done with a Beach Bonanza airplane. Now, they did a lot of tests. Some theoretical things that can be taken away from it, that they established that in theory, it's best if you have an engine failure after takeoff and you decide to turn around, that you do it with 45-degree bank angle, a speed that's just 5% over the stall speed. And of course, it's best if you have flown your initial climb with VX, so the best angle of climb speed. Now this is theoretical. Flying a 45-degree bank angle, just 5% over the stall speed, has a high risk of a stall. So I wouldn't do that, but you can take away that you shouldn't fly a too shallow bank angle of maybe 15 degrees, but probably something between 30 and at the maximum 45, and not too fast. Now I think 5% over the stall speed is a bit slow for practical reasons, that is, because you will have no practice in doing that. Often in the handbook there is a speed given. Let's say it's 70 knots, whatever, for engine failure after takeoff, then just fly this speed. What you can take away from it though is just don't fly too fast. Just don't fly 90 knots because this will increase your turn radius and will make things more difficult. And then there's the human factor. During those studies, they have shown that many pilots at their first try returning to the airport, even then, if they were trying to keep exactly 45-degree bank and it's such a slow speed, they went out of control during the turn. But after a few practice runs, they did it perfectly. So this is a big issue, actually, that having practice doing this. So I really encourage you to do it with an instructor. Do this in a simulated, safe way a few times. You can first do it not on the airport, but somewhere in the training area, just to get a feeling how much altitude you lose during a 180 or actually a more than a 180-degree turn. And then you can try it at the airfield. If the conditions are permitting, then you can try it. Because if it happens in real life, first of all, there will be the startle effect. So it will happen and you won't believe it. And a few seconds will pass before you react, and then it might be too late to turn around. So practice is very important here as well. And only, I cannot stress this enough, only turn around when you're absolutely sure that it will work out. Also, what I haven't mentioned yet is if you're departing with a crosswind, let's say you have a 10 knots crosswind from the left, and you do decide to turn around in the event of an engine failure, it's better to turn into the direction of the crosswind. So if you have a crosswind from the left, you should turn to the left and not to the right for your turn back to the airfield. All right. So the important things to take away: always do a thorough departure briefing so that you know in the event of an engine failure that you immediately know what to do and you're able to react immediately. Know the performance of your airplane. Also know the terrain. If you have really flat, nice terrain in your departure direction, then actually it's always the best choice to simply, in the event of an engine failure, continue straight ahead and just land there. Don't take the risk of the return to the airport as long as you're not absolutely sure that it will work. All right, so in the simulator, we are lucky we can try this in a really safe way. So I'd say I'll see you in the airplane.